All right, everybody. So, we've been talking a lot about some pretty grim developments in regards to trans rights and legislation in this country, but I think it's time for us to go over a video that should kind of bring a little bit of a better swing to your day, I suppose. You see, I'm not trans. I am cis. I'm not gay. I'm straight. And, I can't really internally, experientially, relate with trans and just generally queer people broadly, right? Like, I don't have experiences that allow me to, draw experiential stories and anecdotes to connect to my rhetoric on this, but I have friends, and I've done a lot of research in this stuff, and I know that my positions are correct. At least I know that all of the smart people know that this position is correct. And basically, I feel as though if you were trans and you were here in America, subjected constantly to the current media circus of anti-trans, straight-up genocidal, hateful rhetoric that is being passed around right now and being made millions off of, then you would start to almost feel a certain twinge of self-doubt, right? Like, maybe a little bit. Even if you are very well informed on all of this and you know yourself very truly, at least a small amount of, I don't know, like, an if of self-doubt, perhaps. And even if that's not the case, the lingering worry that other people might experience that self-doubt, or that normies who don't, fall into the LGBT community are going to fall for the narratives that are being pushed. And I think what's important to constantly remind everyone of is that the facts, science, data, all of this is on the side of trans rights. And we've actually watched a couple science videos, like very high production value, very well-respected and reputable science channels who've made pro-trans science videos in the past. We've reacted to them on stream. But literally just 18 hours ago, one of my favorite science channels, Sabine Hosenfelder, released, or Hassenfelder, I think is how it's pronounced, sorry, released a video. It's got 190K views in 18 hours, and it's called, "Is Being Trans a Social Fad Among Teenagers?" She has 858K subs, and while I haven't watched the video yet, I know her credentials. I know I've watched her videos. Her science videos are pretty good, and I'm pretty confident I know what her answer is going to be, and it's going to be no. The answer is going to be no, and she's going to explain the science behind all of this, probably quite thoroughly, I think. She's kind of sus, though. Do you really think so? Have you seen the video before me and something she says is sus? Well, we're gonna find out what she has to say about this. She typically does pretty good videos, but we'll see.
Should transgender teens transition?
Whoa, hold on. That's way too fast. All right, there we
Should
go.
transgender teens transition? This rather personal question occupies a prominent place in the American culture war. On the one side, you have people claiming that it's a socially contagious fad among the brainwashed woke who want to mutilate your innocent children. On the other side, there are those saying that it's saving the lives of minorities who've been forced.
Oh, I should probably add like a little bit of an addendum here, because some of you in chat are going to probably not be able to pick up on this if you're not a regular watcher of her content. But English is not her first language, and so when she does sarcasm, or when she's doing like a hyperbolic sort of voice for presentation to like sort of talk about how sort of volatile the discussion is, it may kind of sound like she's believing in one side and doesn't believe in the other. Yeah, she's German, so English isn't her first language, German is, but yeah. Unless in Germany, do they teach? No, they teach German as first language in Germany for sure. Anyway, yeah. Just wanted to throw that in there just in case anyone here, might get tripped up by
On the
that.
other side, there are those saying that it's saving the lives of minorities who've been forced to stay in the closet for too long. And then there are normal people like you and I who think both sides are crazy, and could someone please summarize the facts in simple words, which is what I'm here for. So what's going on? Is it true that the number of teenagers who identify as transgender is rising rapidly? What's gender-affirming care? Does it work? And why are some countries like Sweden, Finland, and the UK rolling back gender-affirming treatments for children? That's what we'll talk about today.
All right.
The vast
Let's
majority
go.
of humans are born with an unambiguous biological sex that's either male or female. While there are some intersex conditions,
Wait, I literally just said when she's doing chat. I just said I just said she does a thing sometimes when she's talking about like the like discourse where she sort of hyperbolically states the positions in the whole thing.
biological sex that's either male or female. While there are some intersex conditions, they're rare. For the most part, biological sex in humans is fairly simple. People with XX chromosomes are biologically female, have ovaries and grow breasts. People with XY chromosomes are biologically male, have testicles and leave the toilet seat up. It's more difficult for some fish who can change their sex, but
She's simplifying it here, but my understanding is actually that your chromosomes more so determine what hormones are released while you are in uterine development and what what are they called? Gonadal ridges, I think is the term for them. What your gonadal ridges develop into. Will you have XX chromosomes and thus have the hormones released that cause your gonadal ridges to turn into a vagina or into a penis, right? And the issue is, there are a lot of chromosome combinations that are not the typical XX or XY, which can result in all sorts of potential outcomes physically. But there are also cases in which, regardless of chromosome pattern, there are congenital complications in which it doesn't matter what chromosomes you have. You will still have a DSD, difference in sexual development. I also want to mention, by the way, and this is true of two different stats because intersex people and trans people make up roughly the same percentage of the population at the moment, though there is a little overlap. They are still separate separate circles in the Venn diagram. Both these stats are around 1 to 1.5% of the world population are both trans and are and in the same stat are also intersex, for like the older terminology, right? If you took all the trans people in the world and like put them into one landmass and made them into a country, that would be in the top 10 most populous countries in the world. The same goes for intersex people. If you took every person in the world with DSDs and put them into one country, it would be among the top 10 populous countries in the world. Learn that from the SciShow video that I think it was Hank Green did.
there are few fish among my subscribers, so with apologies to all fish who may be watching, I'll leave this complication aside. Gender identity is as difficult as sex is simple. Gender refers to our internal sense of being female, male, or something else. As everything internal, it's subjective and hard to properly define. Gender identity comes about by a mix of genes, acquired biological traits, environmental and social factors, and cultural expectations.
This is true. I do believe that there is an aspect of I think what we call gender is a clumping of things that are probably to an extent biologically predetermined in the same way that certain aspects of someone's personality probably are, and a bunch of things that are environmentally ingrained in us, and then a bunch of things that are just sort of like random. Like by chance you just happen to be like into, and that's what you end up like how many people do you know their way of expressing themselves is through, like, I guess we'll use the example on screen, tattoos, right? And the only reason that they're super into tattoos is because they met someone when they were a teenager who was super into tattoos and got them into it. It's stuff like that. You know, circumstance can lead to these things, right? That's obviously maybe not the best example, but a lot of it's probably environmental. Some part of it is got to be like some sort of psychological, deep, possibly genetic part, because we know a lot of trans people experience dysphoria, which is an overwhelming psychological dissonance between body and mind. And that suggests there's got to be something about gender, or what we call gender, that is deeper than just the social prescriptions we make. Not that that really changes anything about like being pro-trans or anything like that. It's just, I think it's interesting.
When someone's perceived gender doesn't align with their biological sex, we've come to call them transgender. The other case, when sex aligns with gender, is often called cisgender. Transgender people may feel like they're trapped in the wrong body. Not all, but some of them are distressed by this experience and develop what's called gender dysphoria, a recognized psychological condition which might severely limit their quality of life. Some transgender people prefer not to draw a distinction between sex and gender, and instead distinguish between their experienced gender.
And they're stupid. Because unfortunately, the reality that sex and gender aren't the same thing doesn't matter, regardless of whether or not you want to be like a good trans and buy into the conservative dumbing down of biology and sociology that they desperately need to do to push their genocidal rhetoric. I don't care if you want to be one of the good trans and like dumb your position down. I don't care. I don't care.
And the sign
I do not respect you.
Gender, or the gender assigned at birth. For the rest of this video, we'll do the same. Being transgender is neither new nor necessarily detrimental to mental health. It's just a not very common variation of normal human development. Personally, I find it highly questionable there's such a thing as normal human development to begin with. Have you ever seen a normal human? I haven't. More seriously, records of transgender people date back thousands of years. Several cultures, for example in India and Thailand, have communities of a third neutral gender. Unfortunately, transgender people have historically been stigmatized in many societies, have been ridiculed, been targets of violence, and been forced to fit into the binary masculine-feminine pattern. In many places, this is still happening, and in some countries, such as Indonesia and Nigeria, being transgender is still illegal. The combination of social and physical challenges makes the lives of transgender people, especially young ones, difficult. A 2017 survey of 125,000 American high school students found that transgender students were much more likely to report having suffered sexual violence while on a date, a problem that affects more than 1 in 5.
The reality is that when it comes to the risk of, like, a trans person predating on a cis person, the reality is that trans people massively disproportionately are the victims of a lot of types of violence, particularly sexual violence. This idea that, like, trans women are going to go into women's bathrooms and, like, assault women? No. It's the trans women that are getting sexually assaulted. That's what the data represents. This entire point the right has based their culture war on, the exact opposite of what they claim is true.
And about 1 in 3 reported having attempted suicide. That's more than 3 times higher than the suicide risk among cis women. This is why, starting in the 1970s, the medical profession took steps to prevent psychological distress of transgender people, the Dutch leading the way. This isn't a history channel, so I won't go through all the twists and turns. Let me just tell you how gender dysphoria is defined today. Psychiatrists classify mental disorders using the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM for short. Its latest edition is the DSM-5-TR, that's the 2022 update. It specifies gender dysphoria in children as a marked incongruence between one's experienced or expressed gender and assigned gender of at least 6 months duration that is accompanied by a strong desire to be of the other gender or an insistence that one is of the other gender or some alternative gender different from one's assigned gender.
Holy shit! What a reasonable definition. And pretty much the same one that I have been saying on my stream for a very long time. Particularly against, not TERFs, against True Scum, who try to say that you cannot be trans unless you fit some bizarre, retarded, arbitrary line that they'll try to bring up. And it's like, no, the medically accepted definition of trans is literally anybody who does not identify with the gender identity they were assigned at birth. This is just a more wordy way of saying if someone identifies as a gender identity that is incongruous with their sex and different from the one they were assigned at birth, these mean the same thing pretty much, effectively, then they are transgender. And that desire, that innate desire, that strong desire that causes, like this is, like we're talking about like a strong desire that causes intense you know, mental trauma to not be able to achieve, I should say, or I could say, that is gender dysphoria.
It must be associated with significant distress and at least 5 other symptoms, such as a strong preference for toys or clothes stereotypically used by the other gender, or a strong dislike of one's sexual anatomy. That's the diagnosis of gender dysphoria. Now let's talk about this self-identification as transgender. The share of people who identify as transgender in the developed world is typically around 0.5%. For example, in the
For the record, transgender self-identification and like online trans like community stuff that's like not overseen by medical experts, that only exists because conservatives are cracking down on and restricting access to professional medical specialists in regards to gender affirming care. The more readily available that gets, the less negative side effects that may potentially get brought up in this video to trans affirming care are likely to occur.
2021 UK government census, about 0.5% of people older than 16 answered no to the question of whether their gender is the same as their sex registered at birth. The US Census Bureau did a similar survey in 2021 and saw 0.6% identifying as transgender. A 2021 census in Canada among people aged 15 and older saw 0.19% identify as transgender and 0.15% as non-binary. Curiously, though, the fraction is considerably higher among teenagers than among adults. For example, last year a survey from the Williams Institute at UCLA found that in the age...
The reason for this, from what I can tell, is the fact that Gen Z is far more accepting amongst itself of transgender people. Well, let's think about it the same way it happened with gay people, right? This same phenomenon happened with gay acceptance. We saw that, like, each consecutive generation, as gay acceptance became more broad, more teens ended up being gay. The same phenomenon happened with left-handed people. Very good point, 7X. In the 1930s, that was around the time when left-handedness stopped being punished in public American schools because it was seen as, like, sinful in the devil's hand or whatever the fuck it was called. Anyway, when you look at a chart that tracks births of left-handed children, throughout the years from, like, I think it was 1900 to 2013 was the stats, you see that from 1930, when left-handed students stopped being punished in school, for about 20 to 30 years, you saw a very sharp increase in left-handed students until sometime in the 80s or 90s, it basically plateaued out. It's not because being left-handed is a social illness of some kind that, like, spreads to people. It's because there's always been left-handed people, and once you start to stop repressing them, you're slowly going to see them, start to become represented statistically in society accurately. When you suppress them, you're going to think there's a lot less of them than there actually are. It's really just that simple.
Group 13 to 17, the percentage of Americans who identify as transgender is about 1.4%, more than twice as high as that among adults. And while the percentage of adults that identify as transgender has remained roughly stable, that among teenagers has almost doubled from 2016 to 2021. It's a steep increase. In the United States, the number of gender clinics which treat children has grown from basically none to more than 100 in 15 years. Just like the wrinkles in my face, a good reminder that correlation is not causation. According to data collected by the American health tech company Komodo Health for Reuters, the number of insured children aged 6 to 17 diagnosed with gender dysphoria in the US has increased from 15,000 in 2017 to 42,000 in 2021, so roughly a factor 2 to 3. About 6,000 of them are either on puberty blockers or undergoing hormone therapy. One expects the true numbers to be somewhat higher because they didn't count cases that were not covered by insurance, but it's probably not a huge difference. To put these numbers into context, there are about 25 million children in the US in that age group, which means we're talking about roughly 3 in 10,000 children who are taking medication for gender dysphoria. So we may be looking at a steep increase.
Oh my god, do you remember the fucking Rogan clip with Matt Walsh when he talks about puberty blockers? Oh my god. Alright, we'll watch it with David Pakman's commentary. This clip's too good not to play for you guys.
We're talking about the drugs, millions.
Okay, so millions on puberty blockers. All right, let's continue.
You're talking about hormone blockers.
Yeah.
Millions of
blockers
kids have been on hormone blockers, really?
I'm sure someone's going to fact check me on me, but my guess is that we're into the millions now at this point. Yeah, that would be my guess. I can say for double mastectomies, the most
Okay. So millions on hormone blockers, millions of minors on hormone blockers. The best data I was able to find is that there's 120,000 children struggling with what is often called gender dysphoria. Some small fraction of those at some point might take some of these medications. Okay. He says millions a year. The total number with gender dysphoria, 120,000, only a fraction of those are taking these medications. So first lie. Do the numbers really even matter to these people? I don't think so, but there's the first lie.
I read a report recently that there were over 1,000.
Oh, let me back up because now they're onto something else.
I can say for double mastectomies, I read a report recently that there were over 1,000 done between 2016 and 2019. And when you compare that to how many were done between, 2008 and 2015, it's a massive.
Okay, but that's 300 a year. Huh. That doesn't sound so high, does it? But that's not even really right. Let's continue.
Increase. And over 1,000 girls had gender affirming double mastectomies in that time frame.
Is that Walsh just lies?
Yeah, they will be. And I also, I actually think that this shouldn't be happening.
Okay, so Jamie just brought up the actual number of kids on puberty blockers.
So now they've pulled up an article.
Okay.
It's a very small number.
Thanks, David.
That's right.
It says over the last 5 years, there were at least 4,780 adolescents who started puberty blockers.
Okay. He said there are millions of adolescents on puberty blockers. They just found a study that says it's under 5,000 over 5 years. That's under 1,000 a year. He said millions. Study says it's under 1,000. Think about that.
And at a prior gender dysphoria diagnosis.
Under 1,000 a year. He said millions.
It's kind of undercounted, but
that would be a big undercounting.
Less than 1,000 people a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess, hundreds of thousands.
Let me correct my...
Yeah, he would guess. Okay, I had to play that for you guys. I had to give you guys that as a treat, This is a treat. I don't know if we're going to watch the whole video. I think we're going to get to the end of this segment, and I'm going to recommend that you guys go watch the rest on your own because I don't want to rip the entire thing and react to it. I don't have permission from her to react to the whole thing on stream. So I just want to give you guys a taste of it, get you guys to go watch the rest, but we'll watch a bit more, okay? I'm liking the video a lot so far. I'm definitely going to finish it off stream.
But the total numbers are small. Still, it's puzzling and not an exclusively American phenomenon either. The same has been observed in the UK, where the number of referrals to the British Gender Identity Development Service has increased by more than a factor of 20 from 2011 to 2020. It's also been seen in Sweden and in Canada and pretty much everywhere where they've collected numbers. Curiously enough, the big bulk of the increase comes from children assigned female at birth, wishing to transition to male. This is weird because
100% the reason for this, and I'm willing to bet, I am so willing to bet that when gay acceptance started to rise within teen populations, that young girls started to be more open about being gay before younger boys did. This probably has to do with the fact that women are probably socialized to be a little bit more likely to be open about something like that. That's an emotionally open thing. So if you're socialized to be a woman and then you realize, say, actually I feel more non-binary, or you realize you're a man, your socialization is most likely going to have led you to be a little bit more likely to embrace and be open with your emotions, your feelings, etc., and possibly pursue that and even admit it. While I feel with young guys who are assigned, or if you're assigned male at birth and you're a young guy and you were socialized as a guy and then you realize you're a woman or you realize that you're non-binary, your socialization has led you to repress a lot of emotions. The video gets worse later. Really? But I don't want it to get worse later.
Earlier generations, the ratio was the other way round, or approximately equal. The same thing has been observed in the Netherlands, in Spain, in the UK, Canada, Sweden, and is also the case in the USA. Most of the increase in gender dysphoria reports comes from girls. Pretty much no one questions this. What's more controversial is the question whether the typical age of girls to report gender dysphoria is also changing, and if so, why? In 2018, the American physician Lisa Littman argued in a paper based on survey results among parents that the girls being referred to gender clinics in recent years are different from those of earlier generations. They show an onset of gender dysphoria during adolescence, but without prior symptoms, a combination that was previously basically unheard of. Littman dubbed it rapid onset of gender dysphoria.
So here's the big problem with that particular study. I'm very familiar with it. It surveys the parents. And the problem with that is that surveying parents isn't very indicative of whether or not the child has actually suffered symptoms of gender dysphoria from a young age. Children may have a hard time explaining those feelings. Parents may have a hard time understanding them, connecting certain things their child has said in the past to other feelings. It is very iffy to me to try to believe that the word of parents about a child's internal feelings mentally and in regards to their gender identity is more accurate than what the kids say, because there are a fuck ton of parents that do not recognize those symptoms in their kids, and a lot of trans kids who knew from a young age.
And suggested that it's a case of social contagion. Adolescent girls get the idea from social media or their peers or both and come to believe they want to be men, hoping it'll improve their lives. Superficially, the hypothesis makes sense. According to data from the World Health Organization,
keyword on, she said superficially, which she's right about. She is right about this. Superficially, this argument kind of makes a little bit of sense. If you're the average dude online and you know that these TikTok people are so crazy, and you probably don't think very well of teenagers, and you certainly probably don't think very well of teenage girls, then you probably think there's some epidemic of teenage girls who think that it's so bad to be a woman, so they're becoming men in order to that is the kind of thing that I feel like a lot of people at first glance, first thought, are likely to fall for, right? The thing is, it doesn't really hold up the scrutiny when you realize that the amount of effort, commitment, and sacrifice being made to chemically alter your body, even before you've gotten to that extent, but to chemically and surgically alter your body for a fad, to feel like you're fitting in, or to feel unique. I don't even know. This is really, really a big stretch. It's a really big stretch, especially when most of the data shows that the vast majority of detransitioners, these being people who regret transition and try to go back, detransition not because they regret transitioning, it's because they don't have support of family and friends and find that they would rather, live or die as living as cis than live a happy life as trans, because no one in their life supports them. They can't afford procedure and hormones, and they're forced to detransition because they literally can't get access to further, resources to transition, or because they have been convinced that they are on a path that can never reach a valid conclusion. The vast majority of cases are other rather than person detransition because they actually weren't trans and they regret it.
Adolescent girls are twice as likely as boys to suffer from mental health problems such as depression and anxiety, so they're more likely to have a problem to solve in the first place. Littman speculates that girls that age are more vulnerable to social contagion than boys, though there's little evidence to back this up. Littman's paper was strongly criticized.
I don't know how I feel about that, because I'm pretty certain that data suggests that there is not that insane of a gap in reality between boys and poor mental health and girls and poor mental health, I think the matter is that boys are less likely to report poor mental health. I can tell you that when I was a teenager and I was depressed, you could have held a gun to my head and threatened to pull the trigger, and I would not have admitted that I was depressed. I would not have admitted that I had any sort of mental health issue, okay? I, like, out of pride and fucking ego, I would not do it, all right? Like, and I know I'm not the only one. I know I'm not the only one. Yep, chat's already, yeah. So, I don't think there's this, like, I don't think this stereotype that young girls are, like, inherently more unhinged and mentally unwell than young boys actually holds up to any scrutiny. And I call massive bullshit on this perception. I think certain stoicism standards applied by our society play a huge part in kind of muddling this data a little bit.
Criticized for not being a scientific study, but a collection of experience reports from parents.
Yep. Okay, she called it out. Okay, perfect. It literally wasn't a scientific study. It was a survey done to parents of trans kids. That is not going to derive the type of data that you need to derive to prove the point that's trying to be proven about it being a social contagion. Good, okay, Pog.
The parents were recruited among frequent visitors to websites who are skeptical that transgender self-identification among teenagers is genuine. This means the sample is unlikely to be representative. Indeed, Littman herself writes in a paper that it's a descriptive exploratory study. She describes what those parents say. What to conclude from that is a different story. A paper that came out in August.
One problem with that, though, is that in this very explosive climate politically, where what is determined by this research, regardless of what the intention is and how benign a certain a certain study or a certain trial or whatever you're trying to figure out may be, right-wingers in particular are going to be there to weaponize it politically to harm people. That's just the reality of it. They are trying to harm people. At this point, a lot of conservative pundits such as Matt Walsh have said things such as transgenderism must be burned to the ground. It is not acceptable for a single person in this country to think that they are something like that they are a different gender than they really are. Like when we have people like that saying this shit, you can't use the scapegoat of like, oh, well, it was just supposed to be an explorative analysis. It wasn't meant to prove this or that. When, like, well, you got to be careful with how you present these things and be very, very aggressive against people trying to misappropriate your survey that you're trying to present as and trying to present it as something it's not, you know? Like, you have to be on top of that. You have a responsibility with this issue. This isn't just a matter of science. This is also a matter of civil rights. Unfortunately, they've been tied together on this issue.
Last year claimed to have found evidence for the absence of this rapid onset symptom. However, this paper was also strongly criticized for severe shortcomings, such as, most importantly, for phrasing their survey questions in an ambiguous way and creative methods of interpreting their data. The brief summary of this controversy is that at the moment, there is no conclusive evidence neither for nor against the existence of rapid onset gender dysphoria, though it seems to be supported by anecdotal reports from doctors working in clinics who treat the children. The steep increase in the number of girls...
So, the issue with this is that while there may be some anecdotal examples of what one might describe as rapid onset gender dysphoria, the only way to prevent that from reaching a point that's like irreversible and like regrettable, where like detransition has to happen, is making like professional gender affirming care resources available to every potentially dysphoric kid. Because imagine you live in like bumfuck Montana or something, and there's not like a gender affirming care clinic for like 2 states in like a 8-hour drive away, 10 hour plus or something. And you're really in the middle of a desert of gender-affirming care, you think maybe you're trans and you have no realistic resources to seek professional care to figure that out or get treatment or anything. So you start pursuing like DIY HRT, you self-diagnose. And what if you make a mistake? In a lot of cases, there are people who make a mistake. A lot of detransitioners self-diagnosed and self-transitioned. They self-administered their medicine and they did it like without professional medical assistance. Most detransitioners are older. They were literally transitioned before a lot of the professional resources even existed in the same way they do now. If you want to prevent these false flags from happening, you want to make this professional medical care more widespread, because frankly, I don't think anybody knows better than the doctors who study and are professionals in this field. Because if there are anecdotal examples of gender-affirming care clinic doctors reporting what they think might be rapid onset gender dysphoria, then we need more of these kids going to those doctors at these clinics so they can figure out that's the case and set those kids on the right path. Does that not make sense to all of you? I think this is the point where I'll cut off the video so you guys can watch the rest. I heard that apparently it gets worse than the rest of it, but I don't want to react to the whole thing and risk copyright. I don't have permission to react to the whole thing. But I think it's pretty clear. I think it's very, very clear, just from the start of the video and the bits that we watched here, that she is not transphobic. I think that on like a principle moral level, she is pro-trans. Like I think she is like, I think she believes like in the fact that like gender and sex aren't the same thing, and trans women are women, trans men are men, and that like all that good stuff. And maybe she has some like skepticism about some of the research and the data, because this is emergent science in some areas. But I think in the core of it, her heart is in the right place, even if there are some iffy portions in the end. I recommend you guys check it out yourself. And yeah, I did like it. I actually liked the part of the video that I saw, and I do think that even if there are some cringe parts later, she is not transphobic. This is emerging science, to be fair, or emergent science, to be fair, in some sectors of this issue, which means some people who are into the scientific field are going to have some controversial opinions that we may disagree with. But that's because some of these things are not as set in stone as we know them to be. Most of it is, like most of the stuff she's gone over obviously is, but like there are some sectors of this that are a little bit on the border, right? And aren't as sure as far as like if you're going to make a video where you're setting your position hard and your stance hard and planting your flag in the sand for everyone to see, you may not want to really put your name on some bordering emergent research, right? Maybe I'm being overly defensive of her. I like her content, but I think this video was pretty good. There will be a link to the original video pinned in the comments down below, and I hope you did enjoy this, because I think it was pretty damn good.